Welcome back to the Reier on YouTube channel, where it is time for a no sleep teal rejoiner, is what we're calling this episode. Evan Reier, it's been a while since
Been a
we've
while.
gotten together. Yeah, in the words of Stain, it's been a minute since we've gotten together here on the channel, but kind of wanted to let things sort of play out, understanding that it was such a disappointing season for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Anticipated change, perhaps on multiple levels. It started that way initially with Doug Peterson being relieved of his duties as head coach of the Jaguars. Then we went into this hiring process for his successor, thinking Trent Baalke still going to be
Yep.
around. But we get about 10 interviews deep into this thing, I guess. And Baalke is then moving on from his role as general manager, becomes a really Shad Khan production, I would say. Although we
Yeah.
know now, and we anticipated during the process, Tony Baselli being a part of this as well and screening candidates and helping maybe Jacksonville get back and circle back on Liam Coen. So many moving pieces we need to get to today, Evan. But initially, anyway, are you happy at least that we're here, that we're at this point in terms of GM, head coach, and those dynamics moving forward?
I definitely like Cohen as a offensive mind. I mean, you look at his track record, what he's done with the Bucks over the past couple of years since he joined that organization. Definitely, a positive hire when you think about the identity of this offense, what he was able to do with Baker Mayfield, potentially being able to translate that to Trevor. Although, as we've talked about before, it does concern me a little bit. Baker, he's not a perfect quarterback, but he's got that it factor. He's got that, edge to him. We need to see that develop in Trevor if we want Cohen, I think, to actualize this offense properly. But overall, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially when you consider the personnel that the Jaguars currently possess. Think about the two running back attack in Tampa. You could definitely see him getting a lot out of ETN and Bigsby this upcoming season. The process is a little bit of a joke to me. I can't say. I mean, you go look at what Adam Schefter. There was an anonymous source that provided. He was like, "I've never seen anything like this." I literally, this is unorthodox to say the least. But
uh,
overall, I am relatively happy to move on from Balky, and I'm relatively happy with Cohen as the pick.
Yeah, it was kind of the bumblebee approach. It
Yeah,
wasn't the straight line approach. It
no,
went a little
absolutely
bit
not.
like this, but we are here. I hear you. We'll start with Liam Cohen and kind of what we think he brings to the table. Obviously, this is kind of a fork in the road situation with this point. At this point with Trevor Lawrence, I don't think there's
Yeah,
any other way to say it. If it doesn't work now, and understanding Trevor's health is going to play into that, something he hasn't been able to sustain the last couple of years. But if he's healthy for the most part, and you're thinking too that Cohen and his offense should help Trevor even in that regard, because I've said it throughout the season, or I said it throughout the season. I think you got a Ryan Tannehill, Trevor, a little
yeah,
bit. And that's what Liam Cohen's offense, I think, will do. I don't think it'll be completely Tennessee Titans like. I don't think it's going to be Arthur Smith, although the physical resemblances there between Liam Cohen
yeah.
and Arthur Smith are a little uncanny. But, I felt better after the press conference too. And by the way, I didn't really care about the Duval thing. I know that
Yeah,
got a
who
lot of
cares?
run. I think within the fan base, the fans are pretty delighted with this hire after hearing from Liam Cohen on that big stage yesterday. I don't think, in terms of meme history, that will come close still to uh, Stole the Show. I think
Yeah,
she's
absolutely not.
safe. I think our favorite is safe there on that Mount Rushmore of Jaguar memes. But yeah, in terms of what he brings to the table, I love the run game numbers for the
Yeah,
Bucks
dude.
more than probably anything else. I don't need another quarterback whisper. I don't need another West Coast offense, put it all on Trevor, and those type of things. I like this approach that Liam Cohen's going to bring to the offensive side of the ball. I think it helps Trevor. I think it helps that defense. Um, and your point about the running backs, I think that's interesting too, because is Travis Etienne really maybe a great fit for what Liam Cohen wants to do? I know you want to have that sort of two back tandem that complements each other. I think Tank Bigsby is a big winner in all this. I
Oh,
think he could
absolutely.
potentially thrive in this offense under Liam Coen. But I think Coen hit on it too. Lines of scrimmage have to be addressed with an emphasis on the offensive side of the ball, which leads you to wonder what's that going to look like for 2025. Thinking that the tackles are pretty much set, but maybe the interior of that offensive line could look different, Evan.
Well, a big sign that it could change is, who probably is benefiting the most slash most excited about this when you talk about lines of a scrimmage? Luke Fortner.
Absolutely.
Because Liam
Because
Coen,
Cohen's offense at Kentucky basically, I think, got Fortner drafted where he got drafted, right?
absolutely. I mean, this is a lifeline for Luke Fortner's career in Jacksonville. I mean, really. It's hard to imagine him not, at least being on the squad. I would say if we had gone a different route, there's a chance that, they might, cut Luke Fortner loose. Just roll with Mitch Morse or roll with somebody else. But with this in mind, I would not be surprised to see him actually starting at the beginning of the year. This is very far away out, but I think that's very much on the table. I think the offensive line, you probably won't see much changing. I think the defensive line is where, if you saw things kind of getting flipped around, maybe some guys that you would have typically expected to stick around, maybe getting out of there. I could see that happening, but we also have to see what kind of staff Liam
Yeah.
Coen can build in Jacksonville. I know right now they're kind of deciding on which guys to bring back from that previous staff. There's already, I know, one or two names that appear to be coming back. So yeah, I mean, I think yeah, you're right though. While the rushing attack, you can talk about the tandem, you can talk about the guys taking the handoffs. It's still, you got to be able to block. And I would say that, Cohen and the offensive staff at Tampa did a pretty good job. I mean, don't get me wrong. I would say that Tampa's offensive line is definitely, I would say, of a higher quality than what the Jags posted last year. But I wouldn't say it was an elite group. I would
Mm,
say they overachieved. So maybe they can do the same with who they've got in Jacksonville or who they're going to decide to bring in. I think with Bigsby's going to take that Bucky Irving role, ideally. He's kind of
mhm.
going to be your lead guy. And then, ETN can kind of do the Rashad White stuff. He can,
Yeah.
be a little bit more of just a receiving back. But you never know. I mean, we've got a long way ahead of us this offseason. ETN's going to be in a really, really important year in terms of getting paid. This is his chance. So that's good motivation. But in terms of actually, making it happen, like I said, it's going to be there's going to be a lot of steps in this process before we really get to know what the identity looks like.
Yeah, I mean, Liam Cohen is a name that might sound like your PGA Tour Rookie of the Year more than
Yeah.
a head football coach, but he does talk a lot about physicality
Oh yeah.
as a non-negotiable, and with an emphasis on the offensive line. Yes, Luke Fortner was a standout at Kentucky under Liam Cohen. We know though that relationships only go so far when you get to the National Football League. Obviously, it's not a bad thing for Luke Fortner that Liam Cohen is now the head coach of the Jags. But I liked even his first stint at Kentucky when he had Christian Rodriguez, Smoke Cavassier in that backfield, and then Will Levis. He took on Will Levis, and when you look at Levis's 2 seasons at Kentucky, it was clearly a better 2021 under Liam Cohen with Rodriguez in that run game than it was in, say, when he circled back in 2023 and didn't have had Devin Leary, I think, at the quarterback position
Yeah.
a couple of seasons ago. But the Jags now, we wonder about the sort of power dynamic, Evan, with Trent Baalke out as the general manager. We do know, based on comments from both Tony Baselli here locally and then from Shad Khan at the press conference on Monday, that Bo is basically in line for a front office role, and I'm guessing it's not as an advisor. I'm
Yeah.
guessing that executive VP title that's been thrown around would certainly be in play. Your thoughts on maybe the dynamic of the power structure moving forward?
I mean, I definitely like the idea of Baselli being in a high up role. I definitely don't want him as GM. I know that that's a big point of conversation and really has been over, the past year as people, try and figure out, is Balky sticking around or not. I would love him as like a VP of player personnel or something like that. Um, I think it makes sense. I like the idea of having a tandem, maybe a guy that doesn't know the organization as well, but is just really, really good at, drafting, at making deals, all that different stuff. And then having Baselli, who's maybe not as versed at that, but knows this organization inside and out. I like the idea of them working together. I wouldn't be surprised if they go that route, if it is kind of a tandem situation where Baselli's almost GM kind of thing. Um, if they go for a guy that Coen really wants, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Because in that situation, you would have a guy that in Baselli that Shad Khan feels really comfortable with, and then you would have a guy that's in Cohen's corner as well. Um, I think that could work. The only problem is we talked about this before, even with the staff on the Jaguars. Something that Balky and Peterson did was it did kind of feel like there were maybe too many people involved. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. That is the only concern I have is when you have a bunch of different dudes, all with different perspectives. That can either be a major asset or it can be a major kind of distraction or red tape. Getting in the
Mhm.
way of doing what really matters.
Yeah, I don't mind the one voice type of approach when it comes to the structure of the front office. I didn't really mind it with Trent Baalke kind of being that guy, the end of the road, so to speak, when it came to everything football related to the Jaguars. I hear you if you have sort of this executive VP, general manager situation. And then I'm going to guess you've told Liam Cohen he's certainly going to have a very strong voice as it
Absolutely.
relates to personnel. So that's where you do have concerns, perhaps. But, I would think too, a lot of this has been laid out, you would hope, with Shad and going through this process. I would think it was discussions like the one we're speculating about that led to Trent Baalke moving on altogether. Because I know it's been sort of reported or believed that Trent Baalke was let go, but it also wouldn't surprise me if Shad, going through this process, came to the decision that, look, whether it's the head coach and or the next general manager to go along with maybe Bo in a role, we're going to have multiple guys with voices that resonate. It's not just going to be Trent Baalke moving forward. Trent Baalke's old school too. I could
Yeah.
see a scenario where that's presented to him and Trent says, you know what, this is probably the point where we need to go our separate ways. I would say mutually agreed upon might be a scenario I could see more with Trent's departure than just a straight up Trent, we're letting you go, or even Trent just saying I'm out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we probably won't learn for maybe even years about how this went down. But I could definitely see a scenario where maybe Shad, in the process of these interviews, was like, Trent, look, you know, these guys clearly don't want you just as the solo dude. Maybe we have somebody that basically has the same amount of voice power as you. Would you be willing to do that? And they didn't come to terms on that. I could see that
Yeah.
as a thing. I remember, on Twitter and other places, people saying, well, maybe Balky goes through the draft. He just, and then they kind of move
No.
forward. I'm glad that they didn't wait any longer. I don't think that makes any sense to draft a class and then let the guy go. But
I don't think that was Trent's perspective. I
yeah,
think Trent's perspective was, nah, we
I'm doing
ride.
it. Yeah.
We ride.
I mean, but that's the thing though, is that you have to, at the end of the day, whether it doesn't matter how much Shad Khan likes Trent Baalke,
Yeah.
you can't like send a signal to NFL coaches that you will just ride with this guy over, any coach that you bring in. That
And
just
there's so,
doesn't work. And
no,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, there's so much talk too about coaches will be very outspoken about not wanting to work with Trent. I don't think it works that way either. That's why you have
Yeah,
representation. You let
right.
it be known through your representation that this is the dynamic that you're agreeable to. You
Yep.
don't get into these interviews and go, well, I'll tell you this much, I'm not working with that guy. I mean,
Right.
it doesn't work that way.
No.
So I know some of it can be considered semantics in terms of how you get there, but there is a process that you go through. And I think probably at the end of the day, that's one that, Shad came to that determination as he got through that first round with those 10 or so candidates. And, so now you think about building a staff. What's most important to you Evan, in terms of building this staff moving forward? Now, Liam's obviously an offensive guy, so you put your attention more on the defensive side, or are you still staying on the offensive side of the ball first?
I definitely think you got to nail the DC hire. I mean, that's going to be really, really critical. Coen has already said that he's going to be calling plays. I'm glad we don't have any questions about that after dealing with
You didn't think that
the.
was fun all
Yeah,
season?
no. I'm so tired of that conversation. I hope I never have to have it again. Um, but I think you've got to nail the DC hire, and I think there are some names out there that you could say would be really interesting in terms of potential options. I also think and I think maybe what's most important to Liam. He said in that press conference, he said the most important thing is getting the offensive line right. So that offensive line coach hire better be,
Yeah,
really surefire. I know Cohen can do plenty with offensive line himself, but there better be a guy that, is kind of proven in terms of, again, punching above the weight class. Because even if the Jaguars go in free agency or in the draft, this upcoming season, this 2025 season, is not going to be the ideal finished product of the offensive line or really the offense as a whole. You got to give him some time to kind of get this together. But yeah, I think those are probably the two most important hires that he's going to have to make when he comes to when he actually gets started. I think one name when you think about DC is Patrick Graham.
yeah,
The Raiders haven't necessarily been good as a team, but whenever you would see them on red zone, they would be losing in a tight game that
yeah.
both teams scored in about the teens. And they play in the AFC West. If you're able to keep the Chargers, the Chiefs to low scoring kind of
Even the
games
Broncos now.
in the
Yeah,
Broncos, I like that. I like the idea of that. He was able to get a lot out of those defensive ends in that group. We want to see Trayvon Walker continue producing maybe at an even higher level. We want to see Josh Hines Allen actually make the most of his contract. Who knows? Maybe Eric Armstead can even be redeemed. That's another thing that's interesting. Maybe the defensive line coach is also critical because I don't know if you noticed in that press conference, but Liam Coen said, I know we've got 3 guys on the defensive line
yeah.
that are really talented. I'm curious who he's talking about because I'm guessing he's saying Trayvon Walker, Josh Hines Allen. Who's the third? Is he talking about Eric Armstead?
That's who I think he was referring to. I don't
That's who I
think it
think too.
was
But
Devon, or maybe it was, or maybe Mason Smith.
yeah, I'm
As a young
curious.
guy, I kind of hope that's who he was talking about,
Yeah, that's who I want too. Because Mason Smith really started to flash
because
as
you're counting
in
on
that
him
back
for
of the
maybe the
season.
next 8 to 10 years, whereas Armstead maybe another year, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, kind of what you were saying, and as he said, lines of scrimmage. So there's that offensive line, that defensive line coach, and DC, obviously. Those are, before I'm hiring anybody else, I
Yeah,
want those positions kind of locked down.
DC has got to be better
Yeah.
than it was this year. Obviously, I'm kind of in lockstep with you. DCOL coach, I kind of
Yeah.
put there together. He alluded to special teams wanting to maintain some continuity. I think there with that situation. I think even the wide receiver position, you had to be kind of pleased with what you got. Certainly, the development of Brian Thomas Jr. in 2024 was a positive. So in terms of retention, I think most of the guys on that Doug Peterson staff either have already been let known that it's not going to continue here, and or they just kind of figured out and are looking to make moves. It is also Senior Bowl week, by the way, which
Yeah.
is big for a lot of coaches in the market, making moves. The start of the draft process getting underway out there in Mobile, Alabama. So, Evan, when we think about this moving forward, and getting into the draft process and thinking about Liam Coen and maybe, hearing from him and thinking, what are some guys that line up for him maybe early in this 2025 NFL draft? Is it still defensive line, even though he talked about 3 guys that he feels good about? You're not going to probably go interior OL, right? Where the Jags are picking, at least in the first round. And then still on defense, though, when you think about the secondary and corner, some of those positions. Where's your focus, at least early in this process, for the upcoming draft?
It's a really tough question because they do have plenty of areas that they could address, and this draft it's maybe one of the weirdest draft classes in quite some time, just in terms of depth of talent at certain positions compared to others. Um, if they go OL, it may be a little bit of a reach, but I would love Will Campbell out of LSU. I think that would be a really nice pick. If you're going to go that route, he could potentially slide inside or outside, depending on what you think. I also think that if they're going to go DL, you kind of have to have a question there, because I wouldn't say that the interior defensive line, especially if you draft high, if you go that in the first round, I mean, there's not a ton of value early in this draft for DL. Mason Graham from
Yeah,
Missouri comes to mind. I know he's
Michigan.
already been
Yeah,
projected to the Jags once or twice by
right.
various publications. Um, but that's going to be a tough one. I mean, I think, yeah, again, he's already put the emphasis on line of scrimmage. We know that there needs to be an emphasis on line of scrimmage. So you think there, but it's a weird spot for those positions this year, especially interior DL. What about you?
Yeah, I'm as much as he taught line of scrimmage, it's hard for me to think they might not go there. What we've heard too about this draft is that it's not exactly loaded with elite top 10, top 15, top 20 guys. But when you get the picks 25, 30 through 60 through the second round, there's potentially a lot of value to be had. It's a deep draft in terms of top two rounds, but it's not deep in terms of elite guys maybe in the top 10. When you look at the quarterbacks in this draft, for example, Shador Sanders, Cam Ward. I mean, I'm seeing Jalen Milrow in some mocks in the top five going to the Giants. Yeah, I understand there's a lot of quarterback needy teams that are still out there. And that also tells you why you went ahead and got Trevor done when you did, because
Yeah.
relative to kind of the situation the Giants find themselves in right now, when they didn't really commit to going to get a Jaden Daniels last time around and stuck with Daniel Jones and let Saquon Barkley go, boy, you don't want to have that perspective next year, if you're one of these teams, because then I think it puts you in sort of desperation mode, which I think the Giants now are going to be a case in point on that. I think for what this draft presents, you said it. I think they still need help in enough areas that you could almost go just best player available and probably be okay, especially with a Bryce Hunter out there and those type of talents at the different positions. I don't have a problem going with another wide receiver even early,
No, me either.
because Christian Kirk, what's his future? Gabe Davis, what's his future? You've got Brian Thomas Jr. as a building block, but beyond that, if you got one of these wide receivers there, and you want to go that route again in the first round, I probably wouldn't have much of a problem with it. Kind of flies in the face of physical, physical, physical. But you got to continue to give Trevor the pieces he needs, because as we've seen, he needs help.
Well, and I mean, you go look at that Buccaneers offense from this past year. Sure, the two running back tandem. If anything, it is a credit to Cohen that, don't get me wrong, Bucky Irving is clearly a very talented player. But Rashad White's kind of stock is free fallen since his rookie season. You go look at the wide receiver group. I mean, they in the tight end, Kate Otten. Like, I mean, between Mike Evans and the rest of that
Chris
group,
Godwin, yeah,
Chris Godwin. I mean, they have a really talented group of receivers. So it makes perfect sense. I mean, I would love, maybe even because if you wanted to get the most possible value, you could trade back 3 or 4 spots, maybe to a team that thinks that they could still go get a QB, and then
yeah,
still go get like Luther Burden or somebody,
yeah,
or McMillan from Arizona. He might
yeah,
be there. And then on the other side, I mean, you could also, like you said, just go corner, or what's his name, Johnson from Michigan
yeah.
ought to be there.
Will,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, I think it's a tough decision because, again, if you whoever you select in that top 5 spot, it's kind of like the Trayvon Walker year, where it's going to be highlighted, really strongly. But I don't think that there's a lot of guys that you necessarily think of stars in their
Right.
first season. Really major impact players. If you can find, like you said, in that best talent available, a guy that can just step in, start, and really make a difference, that'd be awesome. But I do feel like it's probably going to be more of an investment rather than something that's, a pay me now kind of situation.
Yeah, some of these tackles in this draft offensively feel like guys that could be interior guys in the NFL. You brought up Will Campbell, which that might be a little early for him, but someone like that could give you some versatility too. You might think, hey, Anton Harrison might need to go inside,
Yeah.
based on this new approach. In fact, when I think of Liam Coen and running the football and physicality, Anton Harrison might be better served, or maybe not
Yeah.
for him from a financial perspective, but
Sure.
yeah, it could help this team more on the interior. Because if you're going to be that type of team, I don't know if Ezra Cleveland's really that guy. And the other guard spots you're going to have to address. Morris is long in the tooth. Uh, Fortner was a nice player for Cohen at Kentucky, but the physicality in his 2 years at center was problematic for
Yeah.
him, in terms of that. So major question marks on that interior, even if the value doesn't say go there in the first round. But like you said, if you trade back, then it makes more sense if
Right.
you do address maybe one of those positions inside, or address the offensive line in a way where, again, it gives you some versatility to do some maybe different things with the guys you got.
No, I think I think every draft cycle, every NFL fan base talks about trading back or trading up because it's exciting, but typically that's not what happens, right? Very rarely do you actually make, that kind of deal. But I will say there is a part of me that would like love there's a QB needy team that maybe has a plethora of offensive linemen that, veteran proven guys. It's rare to see a player traded in the draft trade up process, but I would love that kind of situation where you could move back 4 or 5 spots and instead get somebody that is kind of surefire and then also draft OL. Like you could get a guy that could be ready right now, but also simultaneously get Will Campbell at 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a dream scenario. I don't think that really is what's going to happen, but it is enticing to think about. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is I love that Liam Cohen's very focused on fixing this offensive line, but I feel like there's a lot to fix, I mean,
Yeah.
like you said,
I
it's
think
like
you're going to be looking at guard to guard, probably. I
yeah, I mean,
mean,
those 3 guys in the
3 spots.
center are like I don't trust any of the current group really right
Yeah.
now.
I don't
So
know if it aligns either with what he's talking about doing, right, in the
right.
run game. And
Well,
I love what he said, though. I love what he said about Mike Evans taking ownership even in the run game. That's something I got to think about with these wide receivers too. Am I really going to get that out of Christian Kirk if
yeah.
he stays around? Probably not. Brian Thomas Jr., it's more what he's going to have to take on even as your number one moving forward. What does that mean for a guy like Evan Ingram at the tight end position
Yeah.
if physicality is a big part of it? I think you've still got a place for a guy like Evan Ingram, uh, but alignment with philosophy and your personnel. You got good players, but you got good players within the scheme moving forward. That's a lot of what's going to be figured out in the next days and months.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you think of when you mentioned Evan Ingram, it's like I could see him like as like basically never lining up next to any of the tackles. You know what I mean?
No.
Like if he's still on the team, if Cohen decides to roll with him, you could see a situation where he basically is exclusively used as a really outside blocker if
Mhm.
he is blocking. It's hard to imagine Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, he's got that edge to him. I think he can definitely get that done. It's definitely a skill that you want him to learn, but hard to see him doing it. Hard to see Christian Kirk doing that. It seems like it's Brenton Strange season again. It
Yeah.
seems like this is, when I think about Cade
I
Otten
think
in that
he's a
Bucks,
good fit for this offense
when I think about
moving
Cade
forward.
Otten in that Bucks offense, I think Brenton Strange is a
Yeah.
like for
Good
like in a
point.
lot of ways.
Yeah.
So,
It's just crazy, man, because we saw the Bucks here.
Yeah.
back in the preseason. And it was like, oh, they got a solid little team,
Yeah.
but this team, the Jaguars, this is what a contender looks like.
Yeah. Sure,
And
man.
boy,
Yeah.
didn't play out that way, but give Liam Coen and the Bucks a lot of credit. I think you said something important early on too. A lot of who you are as a football team in terms of the way Cohen's talking about building it. We all default to the lines of scrimmage because we hear physicality, but your quarterback's got to have some crap in his neck too. It,
Yeah,
it doesn't
dude.
have to be demonstrative or anything like that, but at the moment of truth and when it's on the line, you still got to have that kind of guy behind center. And that's, I think, part of the onus that's going to be put on Trevor moving forward. I don't think Liam Cohen's going to go to Trevor and say, hey, we need you to be really animated, really,
Yeah.
vocal. You don't want Trevor to try to be something he isn't. But even if you're not that guy, the belief has to be real among your teammates that you can be that guy by example if it comes down to it. And I think Trevor's tried it at times. I think Trevor lacks some instincts and things. Maybe like Baker Mayfield has some of that. Like he
Oh,
gets
absolutely.
that situational football, some of those things. When to do the things he does with his legs. I'm not sure Trevor is gifted that way. Um, but yeah, the marriage of more so, as you said earlier, intangibly, Trevor and this new approach moving forward will be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think, with Trevor, it's like, yeah, you can't change his personality. You have to roll with what you have there. But it'll be interesting to see because while, it's not going to be a situation where because this is a new coach and eventually a new GM coming in, that it's like, well, Trevor, you don't have the weight that you had with the last group. Nah, they paid this dude way too much. He's the
Yep.
franchise quarterback. He's absolutely still going to have plenty of pull when it comes to how things go. Simultaneously, I don't think it's going to be the same as what it was last season or maybe the year before. I think that Liam Cohen's going to say, "Look, Trevor, this is the offense we're running. Like
Yeah.
you gotta run it. Like you gotta
Right.
just do it." And ideally, if that rushing attack is able to work, then they won't have to ask Trevor so
Right.
crazy much, to force plays or make things happen. But when you think about Baker Mayfield and Trevor, they're almost polar opposites, in terms
Yeah.
of quarterback play, in terms of
Right.
personality, all
Yep.
this different stuff. The reason why Baker Mayfield is a successful NFL quarterback is because of that edge, because
Yeah, he
of
was a
his
former
ability.
walk on. I mean, he wasn't
Yeah,
a 5 star.
yeah,
Trevor was a 5 star. You're
yeah.
right.
Like this
Totally
is this
different.
is this is a this is a situation where a guy was, in Trevor's case, was groomed to be an NFL first
Yeah.
overall pick, and with Baker Mayfield, it was a guy who had to
Constantly
force
told
his
why
way.
he shouldn't be
Right.
or why
Yeah.
he wasn't.
Right.
And yeah. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch play out. We're just getting into the process, building the staff. As we heard from Shad and others here in the last 24 hours, the GM situation will play out more so over the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks or so. Obviously, you'd like to get that handled because you are going through this with Mobile this week. Ethan Waugh, the assistant GM, though, it seems like Shad, in addition to Trent, really has a good relationship with Ethan. So I think there's comfortability there for now, anyway, that Ethan can guide them through this process, maybe with Baselli eventually chiming in, helping with that as well. They're not just flying blind now without a GM of any kind. Ethan Waugh is a guy that's seasoned to this stuff and can hold down the fort for now, so to speak, until you get some more permanent things figured out for the future. Anything else, Eb, before we get out of here?
No, I was just going to tack on that Shaw did say that the GM search has to be completed by the end of February. I don't love that he brought up the deadline rather than his own kind of
So
timeline.
that means on the 27th, we'll have
All
an
right, guys, let's get
announcement
the
of you
interviews
guys.
popping. Yeah, dude. Like, I don't love procrastination. I'm not saying that that's what they're going to do,
Yeah.
but that did make me wonder a little bit if we're going to, maybe this is going to be a slower process than
Yeah.
maybe you would like.
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, as long as they get a guy that, works, then that's fine.
I
So that's all I wanted to add on.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, does Cohen have input on that too?
Yeah.
And I think there is at least a sense of security for now with Ethan Waugh and Tebow and Tony Baselli and, kind of the dynamic being what it is. But I hear you. I think there are a lot of Jaguar fans that are still a little anxious
Absolutely.
about the whole GM thing after the last few years. Well, Ev, it's great catching up, man. We'll do it again
Absolutely.
soon as we get into the draft process, more of the things that become available to us where the GM is concerned. A lot of stuff coming up here on the
It's
Jacksonville
exciting.
Jaguars
Yeah.
front. Yeah, I think, the fan base is excited. I'll tell you who's excited is the season ticket sellers
Oh
for
yeah.
the Jaguars. I mean, oof, they talk about a rough situation for some folks. They got a little daylight, they got a little sunlight on them here in the last week or so, I think.
Absolutely. I think if you rolled with Bulky, even like, or forget rolling with Doug for another season. We all knew that was going to happen, but I think there would have been a lot of, if you remember the clown protests, I
Ugh.
think we could have been heading for that kind of thing again if Bulky was the GM next season. So I think people will be a lot more likely to say, well, yeah, all right, we're giving it a fresh go. So yeah, fingers crossed that the next month or so goes well before free agency gets started.
There you go. Evan, as always, enjoyed it. We'll do it again soon. And also, thank you for tuning in here on the Reier on YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed to our channel as of yet, hit that subscribe button right now. Hit that notification bell. That way, you're alerted to our content as it drops here on the channel. And if you would give us a like, a thumbs up, we would greatly appreciate that as well. For Evan, I'm Travis. Thanks again. And until next time, so long, everybody.